Hello, John. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us on the Space Careers portal. We'd love to know more about what you do, and maybe you can give some advice to people who are thinking about a career in space and how they can go about it. How does that sound?
Sounds perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I'm going to minimize myself because you're far more interesting than me. So, John, tell us what do you do? Tell us about your company and what you do there.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a space product manager at a company called Réaltra Space Systems Engineering. Réaltra is a small kind of startup that's being incubated within a larger electronics company called Real-Time Technologies. We are located in the north side of Dublin City, and Réaltra has been going since about 2018. Okay. And we're approximately 10 people in the company at the moment.
Your job title sounds amazing. So what does that look like? What does it entail?
Yeah, so a space product manager, it's much like a product manager. So in essence, you are involved with the full what's called product cycle. So taking something from a very early stage, so from even first principles or a low technology readiness level, and you bring it up to a stage where it's a final product that can actually be delivered to a customer or sold on the market. And to get from the very early stage to the last stage, you have to go through a lot of development testing and prototyping and engineering work and discussions with customers, etc. So it's quite a broad, let's say, a broad range of work.
And like, what kind of products then are you talking about? Like, what do you make?
Yeah, so in Réaltra, we're primarily focused on electronics or avionics systems for applications in space. Now, that could be for a launcher system or for a satellite. And we kind of have three areas that we like to focus on. One is taking commercial off-the-shelf products that would usually be used for terrestrial applications, and then trying to prepare them to survive the very difficult environment of space, either through launch or on a satellite. An example of that would be our video kit, Vicky, which is a video telemetry system where we used commercial off-the-shelf cameras that we ruggedized essentially to survive the very violent launch of a rocket. The other things we would do then is for, let's say, European Space Agency mission, which is like a very bespoke, very low risk, long schedule, long duration type mission. We would then develop products from very first principles. So design the circuits, pick the components, run the testing, and then go through such a rigor that we'll know there's a very high likelihood the system will survive the environment, but then it's more expensive. So there's always this trade-off between risk and cost. And then a third section of Réaltra that we are really focused on as well as research and development. So what products could be useful in the future, such as application of artificial intelligence on satellites.
And is this your first job in that's related to space, or did you do something similar before you got to Réaltra?
Yeah, so I had a kind of a fairly meandering path to where I am. So my background is actually in astrophysics. So I did an undergraduate degree in physics with astrophysics in NUI Maynooth, or now Maynooth University. And then I did a PhD in experimental astrophysics at UCD, and that was in gamma ray astronomy. But as an undergrad, I actually was first exposed to, let's say, a near space environment through stratospheric ballooning, an experiment at the University of Chicago called TRACER. And that was, an experiment that would launch to 40 kilometers on a heavy lift balloon through NASA to collect or to measure cosmic rays. So after my PhD, then I continued in that world, and I worked on an experiment called Super Tiger, which was also a cosmic ray experiment. So that was my very initial foray into, let's say, a space environment, because those experiments had to be thermal vacuum tested. They had to be designed to survive, the thermal cycles that you see in space, even though you're not in orbit. And by the end of that, I'd been, let's say, somewhat exposed to all that engineering. But when I decided to leave academia, I actually moved into a small new space company in Barcelona. And that company was interested in launching its own constellation of nanosatellites to do Earth observation, to collect data from aircraft, and to do machine-to-machine communications. So that's where I was exposed again to, let's say, the more rigorous engineering, systems engineering, and qualification testing again of satellites. And after 2 to 3 years in that company, I wanted to come back to Ireland, and that's where I reached out to Réaltra, who were just starting at the time, and luckily I got an interview in the job.
That's fantastic. What does a typical day look like for you then at Réaltra?
Yeah, so it's can really vary day to day. Usually I will check my action list to see what's priority at the moment. The action list grows and grows and grows because we're growing and growing and growing. And it can really vary depending at what stage in the product cycle we are. So it could be that I'm preparing for a test campaign of a product, meaning organizing the test facilities. Could be the thermal vacuum chamber facility, an electromagnetic compatibility facility, etc. Booking those, making sure that we're going to pay them on time. However, I could also be there myself with our equipment running the tests. Alternatively, it could be that I'm writing test reports, or that I'm writing documentation related to the designs of a new product. It can also be just conducting interviews with new prospective employees. And yeah, it can vary a lot. So a lot of meetings with customers as well. Actually, that's another big part of it, is that we have regular meetings with customers to make sure that we are all aligned with building something they want.
Yeah, very people focused, isn't it? You work with people a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so when you were in school, say around the time of TY, and you're thinking about what to apply for in college and all that kind of stuff, did you know that you wanted a career in space, or how did you figure that out?
That's a very good question. So for me, I'm from Donegal, and so growing up in Donegal, I was exposed at a very young age to an extremely incredible night sky. And so my father would bring me out at a very young age to go shooting star spotting, if you will. And I think at that stage, it just somehow that exposed me a lot to, the universe. And then in secondary school, I was quite okay at physics and mathematics and technical drawing, so more the technical work. And so I was thinking about how, what career could I have that included physics in it. And I thought that, wouldn't it be great if I could have a career as a scientist studying the universe as a professional. And so that I kind of maybe came to that conclusion in my 4th or 5th year in the Leaving Cert cycle. However, originally, I was interested in architecture and paleontology, everything until I kind of, let's say, coalesced on the idea of becoming a professional physicist.
That's so interesting. And is it what you thought it would be, or do you feel like what you studied has held you in good stead in your job now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, I know engineering is an extremely important discipline. And in a way, I would have loved to have done an engineering degree, especially helpful now at this stage. But with the physics background, it was a really great training in terms of how to attack problems. And so even if I can't remember a lot of equations anymore, I think the inherent ability to try and get to the core of a problem and see how to solve it has been extremely helpful in the engineering discipline as well.
Yeah. And what subjects did you study at school that you think are still very useful to you now?
I would say physics for sure, just because of learning the process of problem solving. I also found even some technical drawing was quite helpful, again, for getting spatial awareness and an understanding of designs, which is very important in what we do, because design is the first step. I would never ever rule out something like art or even something like music, something that stirs the imagination as well, because that's one thing I think that's underappreciated in the physics and engineering worlds, is how important imagination is, and the ability to not be completely one-dimensional in your thinking. So I would never dismiss that. And sometimes language is very helpful. At the moment, all our work is conducted through English, but we, especially in the European context, have a lot of customers from France, from Germany. And so, having that ability to converse in that language would be a bonus, say.
Yeah. What's the future of space in terms of, like, is it a growing area? Can you see that it's a growing area in Ireland?
Absolutely. And in fact, that was one of the main drivers for me to come back to Ireland, because even though I was in the US and Spain, I could see that there was going to be a growth wave coming, especially from conversations from within the government, but also you start to see just new companies coming in the industrial sense, but then in the academic sense, scientific groups and research institutes appearing with more focus on space. I think you can see globally that there's an interest and an expansion in space from not only the government or established players, but also new space and private companies. In Ireland especially, I think it's a prime time to get into the space industry. And I actually think even more exciting as an entrepreneur, because we're a small economy, we don't have established large space companies. And so it's actually a much more exciting place if you want to have an organically growing space industry. So entrepreneurial spirits and doing it with small teams and having that adaptability and that dynamic approach to space, I think is going to be a really interesting approach.
Okay. So what advice would you give to people, that are at that stage where they're about to think about what to study in college? They may not think that someone like them could possibly have a career in space. What advice would you give them?
I think that there's nothing stopping you from reaching out to people in the space industry, even to just talk to them, to understand what goes on from a day-to-day perspective. There's nothing particularly magical happening in space. It's hard work, yes, and it is quite rigorous for sure. But I think as long as you have an interest in a curiosity about it, you will do fine. And I just suggest to people to reach out and talk and send an email, because there's absolutely nothing bad can happen from sending an email.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, John. That's terrific. So you're going to be joining us on March the 10th for the upcoming Space Careers Roadshow for Engineers Week, aren't you?
That's correct. Yes, I'll be speaking about my work in Réaltra.
Brilliant. And we're looking forward to seeing you then. So we'll see you on March the 10th, and hopefully everybody will join us here. And thanks again for joining us on the ESERO Space Careers portal.
Super. Thanks very much, Niamh.